Well, welcome everyone to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute here at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business owning families. And this conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the J. Hughes Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to J. Hughes and the foundation for making this Author at Drucker series possible. Last month, we heard from Jim Grubman, the author of Strangers in Paradise. If you missed that, please visit our website so you can listen to the recording. Before we begin, I wanted to just mention a couple of exciting things that are coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And okay, one second here. There's Amy Hart Clyne, our guest for today, where I'll introduce her in just a minute. Next month, we'll have Chad Ford talking about his book, Dangerous Love, Transforming Fear and Conflict at Home and at Work and in the World. That will kick off our 2023 Authors at Drucker. And then we do have a few others that are scheduled that I wanted to highlight. Tom McCullough will come on in February and talk about his book, Wealth of Wisdom. Kristen Keffler will join us in March about her brand new book, The Myth of the Silver Spoon. And then we'll be pleased to welcome Trudy Cathy White in April to talk about her mother, really. It's a book that she wrote called A Quiet Strength. So I'm just very pleased with the authors that we have coming. Also wanted to talk to you about the Generational Wealth Masterclass. This is finalized. We're still organizing exactly how we'll get it out to the world, but if you're interested in that, please do shoot me an email. We're gathering a list of kind of early adopters that are interested. And then finally, for any advisors on the call, we have a certificate program in advising family enterprises. It's 6 modules. And it's not an open enrollment program. We're just partnering with institutions to offer this to their advisors. So if there's interest in that, please feel free to reach out to me. With that, we will turn to the real reason why you all showed up today, and that's to hear from Amy Hart Clyne, the co-author with Dennis Jaffe, who's also on this call, for their book, Finding Her Voice and Creating a Legacy. Amy Hart Clyne, thanks for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here, Dave, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. I wanted to just provide a brief intro for those on the call who don't know you yet. Amy is the Chief Knowledge and Learning Officer for Pitcairn, a 100-year-old family office. Pitcairn serves about 150 families of wealth, and Pitcairn provides a full suite of financial services to those families. Amy has been helping prosperous families fulfill the promise and potential of their legacies and achieving wealth momentum for more than 30 years. She started when she was 5. I'm just kidding. She thrives as a bridge builder between people and groups, and is a strategic thinker with a passion for learning and sharing those lessons with others. So Amy, again, welcome.
Thank you.
So to kick this off, Amy, I really would like to start with just the beginning of, kind of what made you want to dig into this topic, and maybe you can talk about some of the research that went into the writing of this book, because I don't even think it was intended to be a book at first, correct? Give us a little backstory.
Yeah, correct. And I want to acknowledge, even before I get going, that my fabulous co-authors is in the Zoom room. So Dennis, I'm gonna work to do us right, my friend. So again, thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really inspiring that so many people have registered and want to hear about this work. I joined Pitcairn, which is a multifamily office, as Dave said, in 2018. And I've dedicated my career really to working with families of wealth. And I found it really remarkable when I joined Pitcairn in 2018 and sort of went through my first year that every family that joined us that year in 2019, the final decision maker was the matriarch. The family was very, the family sort of group, like as normally happens, gets it down to a short list, but I was really fascinated that that it was the matriarchs who chose Pitcairn. And so, I just set out to figure out what that was all about. And as Dave said, I didn't set out to write a book. I just really wanted to better understand the role that women play in wealthy families and how they make decisions and what that means for Pitcairn and our industry and certainly for other family enterprises. And what I learned was that the more people I spoke with, the more apparent it became that these stories needed to be told. And so I called my good friend Dennis, who's one of the giants in our industry, a great mentor and friend to me. And I said, Dennis, what do you think about this idea? And it feels it's actually became deeply personal to me. And he loved the idea. So really the goal of the work was to achieve a deeper understanding of the roles that women play in their families, how they manage the complexity in family enterprises, how they were often caught in the struggle for authority in these family enterprises. And they felt the pressure to fulfill these more traditional expectations as mothers, while at the same time becoming increasingly concerned and interested in how the wealth was going to influence the well-being of their family and their children. They were very curious to see if other people felt that same tension. So, which of course they did. And so really the goal and what sort of influenced me was that I found that these women's voices were often silent and hidden, and that silence actually bothered me. And so thus we embarked on this really great journey of talking to female leaders of wealth.
Well, I feel like great synchronicity with you because I've had this interest in that particular group as well for a time. And I learned a story as I joined the Drucker School about 1.5 years ago, Amy, and I think I told you this story about Doris Drucker, the wife of Peter, who was, not celebrated like Peter Drucker was at all, but she played some really interesting and pivotal roles for him. And I'll just share one story and then we'll get back to it. When she was 82, she would always go to Peter's lectures, maybe not all of his lectures, but she'd sit in the back. And Peter, as he was getting older, his hearing was going. And so sometimes he would trail off in his speaking, and she would yell from the back, louder. And so in an attempt to help her husband and to help his message to really be received by audiences he was speaking to, she actually invented something called the VisiBox, which was a visual thing that would show him where his voice level was so that she didn't necessarily have to be in the back of the room yelling at him. And so as we look at the different roles that women play in family enterprise, I thought that was just a fun one to highlight with Doris Drucker.
Yeah, and that theme of being a complementary partner was a common one in the women that we studied. And so perhaps it would be helpful, Dave, just to talk about who these women were and then some of those roles.
That sounds good.
In this body of work that was largely done in 2020 into 21, Dennis and I spoke to about 40 women living across North America, we actually were going to be quite satisfied with 15 or 20. These are really difficult people to grab their time, but we ended up, it was just a waterfall. And one woman we talked to and another was recommended. And so in the end, we stopped at 40. We have actually kept going beyond that because of the interest in women telling their stories. And so the women, the 40 that are in the book, they range in age from 40 to early 80s. Minimum net worth was in excess of $250 million. The women we spoke with were active in their wealth creation. And then on sort of on the other side, the other cohort were those who were inheritors of their wealth. And the conversations that we had, they were all over the phone. The conversation centered on how the family came to wealth, how they came to wealth as female leaders, how their role in the family developed, what obstacles they overcame, and how they prepared the rising generation while sustaining family harmony. And what was really neat about this experience was that we really took an anthropological approach. We really wanted to have narrative stories of those women, and it wasn't an academic piece, but it was really the power of story. And why I love that story about Doris is that you're going to remember these little stories, and I hope that that's what gets conveyed in the book. I think in terms of the roles, they were, as I said, we had wealth creators and wealth inheritors. Wealth creators were those who have participated in the development of the wealth. They were oftentimes partners in founding some sort of entrepreneurial business. They served as sort of equal collaborator, caregiver, supporting kind of that secondary or support, sounding board. Mm-hmm. And for the inheritors, that were typically second generation or later, they were called upon to become successors and take on the various roles of family leadership in that way. So the roles, in short, sort of circled around kind of three. One is where we just talked about, being a complementary partner, pursuing a shared passion or vision. Another would be working, actually, I would say Doris is this one, working behind the scenes around key tasks to achieve success. And then there were other roles that some of the women in the book took that were really about sort of going out on their own, having their own career, and then seeing how their paths came back to the family enterprise.
Fantastic. So in the book, you talk about these inheritors and then those that are new to wealth. Can you talk about some of the similarities between the two, and then maybe what some of the differences are in their struggles or in the perceptions of their roles, I guess, in general?
Yeah. One of the things that was oddly similar, I would say, is how they felt generally about the term matriarch. And we just defined it as it's typically defined like in the dictionary. And that's a woman who is head of her family, a guide in her role, a model for her descendants. And many of the women that we spoke to were sort of quick to dismiss, even reject that moniker. And they believed that it was a dated concept, that it really only suggested that women leaders were, solely caregivers or mothers or supportive spouses with hidden involvement. And so, as Dennis and I got working on this and we sort of struggled with it, we just decided that we wanted to reclaim that term. We wanted to redefine that term, sort of decode the traits that make up a new or more modern matriarch. And so we did. And so I'm going to read out the definition as we talk about it in the book for the modern matriarch or the new matriarch in our book. And it's a woman who forges her own path in advancing the financial success, culture, and values of her family, with a focus on partnering with her spouse and preparing her children for a life of passion, purpose, and family harmony. And there were sort of four themes that really characterized this whole idea of a modern matriarch. And I'm wondering, for those of you who are matriarchs in your family, if one of these will resonate with you. And so I'll briefly highlight them. One had to do with the fact that the women served as bridge builders and connectors. And, by and large, they were really focused on the incredibly ambitious task of creating threads between the family and the family business. And they tended to focus on everyone else. Their definition of success was interesting. And it was all about alignment and connection. And that was success to them. And they really viewed that the enterprise was something to be shared and shared wisely.
So Amy, to jump in real quick on the bridge builders, did you find that the bridge builders were very active in the development of like family councils, and are they building bridges in that way, or are you speaking more generally?
Yeah, I think it's, that was definitely one of the examples, is taking on a more significant role in sort of a governance system. But around their leadership, they served, their leadership style also was a connector. It wasn't sort of the, the more heroic or mythical way we think of leaders, but they were more sort of steward leaderships or servant leaders, as they're sometimes called, where they really were seeking to inspire family members.
Okay.
Another theme that I thought was powerful is sort of, how did they do that? How did they build those connections? And what we found was that they were really quite committed to creating an inclusive and fair family culture. And the way they did that was to really open up pathways for people to engage in different ways. It wasn't sort of limited to what was in a box and what was sort of historically available. They really were very thoughtful about how to create opportunities for all family members. I thought it was really interesting that the matriarchs were quite adept at using their soft power versus an influence rather than domination. And I think that was a common characteristic of the women that we spoke to. And then sort of lastly, they had the women who really, particularly those who had real momentum, if you will, around their leadership style. There was an inner confidence and an ability to sort of overcome obstacles. I mean, they were working harder often than their male counterparts, which of course is not surprising, but they really had to have some gumption to push through in their own way. And so I would say those are some of the themes around the modern matriarch that was really common to both cohorts. I think the big difference that impressed me the most in the two, whether they were inheritors or creators, was that the inheritors had to be family culture change leaders. So they inherited not only money, but they inherited the culture, they inherited values, and they had to figure out how to reshape that for better inclusion for themselves. And more on the inheritors, it was really very much how to exercise their own role as a female leader, which was a little bit more unique and a little bit more challenging. So there were a lot of commonalities, but there were some very unique differences.
I want to go off script here for a second and just ask about how do we help so that we're not creating competition between spouses, but that we're celebrating and championing each other. Was there anything that came out in your research about how to do that? Because it feels like sometimes you have to work so hard to push through the barriers that it becomes more competitive than it is, each celebrating and helping each other to rise and to find their own, their own way.
I do think, Dave, that happened frequently in terms of competition, whether it be for a parent's attention, typically the father's attention of the children. There was also competition between siblings, and there are several stories that highlight and outline that fact. I think that we, as advisors in the family enterprise space, I think that as we work more towards adapting our style and our means of communication and our engagement with women, we'll better support them in terms of having confidence to talk about their role and feeling confident that can have their own leadership style. And that's okay. I think that on the other side, our hope and expectation is that families will start to acknowledge that women can step into some of these roles in a unique way that they could never, or maybe perhaps their son could not. So I think it's going to take sort of both of us grabbing it for our own, but also supporting them in a new way.
Fantastic. Okay. Amy, in chapter 7, you talked about some of the different paths to leadership that women take. What are some of those key elements that were discovered, and what advice would you give to women on the call today that are pursuing the path of leadership within the family?
Yeah. This is really one of my favorite themes. It was an area that we really focused on, was this idea of women's journey to positions of greater leadership. And what we learned in short is that it was really never a straight line. And that posed real challenges with them. It was often complex, it was circuitous, and finding the way in happened a number of ways, sort of in terms of key themes. One way was for the matriarch to make the choice, which was a hard one, especially in the case of wealth inheritors, to challenge the established culture. Not many women really want to upset the apple cart, in that way, but many did. And those who were successful had some key traits. They had a very strong bond with their fathers. I think they were able to break through some of the gender stereotypes with their father, but those who broke through in challenging the culture had strong bonds with their father. They had a lot of self-confidence. And another key trait here in establishing the culture, right or wrong, was that education played a key role. Greater levels of education really allowed them to challenge that culture. Another way that women defined their path to leadership was how they entered the family enterprise. We described several entry routes to them. Some felt called by the family to take the burden, because in many cases, a woman leader was chosen because something happened. Somebody passed away, somebody didn't want to do it. But what they did that I thought was really neat was that they did so on their own terms. And they didn't even know what those terms were, but they just sort of went with it. So they found that they had to prove themselves to their male counterparts, to break that barrier. But then that wasn't it. They had to continually prove themselves in order to enter the family enterprise. Once they were in, it was still a lot of effort. I'll touch on just sort of one more path to leadership that I thought was interesting, and it was a dichotomy that we've heard often, that we've learned is a false dichotomy, and that is this whole idea of balancing family and business. And what we learned was that really, no matter what their leadership role, most of the women in the study actively raised their children, and they allowed their husbands to pursue their own career. But one of the most significant findings in their research really centered on their lives, as in thinking of their lives as an either or. It's either family or business. But in our conversations, what they revealed was really this false dichotomy, that many women focus more on work or on family at a certain time in different phases, but those phases were present and important to the women's overall happiness. And it was something that we found really interesting. It was that it wasn't either or, it was more of phased. You go in, you come out, you go in, you come out.
I love that because as I think about my own wife, she's so talented, but she's made a choice that she wants to focus most of her time right now on raising kids. And I'm grateful for that and I'm supportive of that. But that may not always be what she wants to do. And so I think of these, these life stages and checking in, and it's not, I'm going to be a career person or I'm going to be this. It's right now I'm choosing this, and then sometime I'll choose something else because, life circumstances and choices and change. So
Yeah,
I love that it doesn't have to be, one or the other, and that life stage, can play a role. That makes a lot
yeah.
of sense.
It's a mindset shift. So you have permissioned a mindset of support. And the families that we spoke to, where there was success in their leadership journey, it was a shared mindset of some sort. So there was a sharing. It wasn't broken apart. It wasn't a chasm. And I think that, kudos to you, Dave.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to pause now. At the end, we're going to have some open time for questions. If, as you're thinking about or listening to Amy along the way and you have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of those at the end as we can. My next question, Amy, is around, I guess, just the challenge of growing up in a family of wealth and feeling maybe underestimated, or sometimes feeling that the reason you're in the company is just because of your last name. Would you mind sharing maybe the story of Carrie and how she chose to navigate those frustrating notions?
Yeah, this is a wonderful woman. Oh my gosh. She is 81, maybe 82. She is a 7th generation family member. So she goes deep back into our days in this country. And Carrie grew up in an enclave that where everyone was wealthy. And so she really had no idea that was unusual or really or special. And when she was 16, she learned of her trust. It was significant. And from that early age, it gave her a very different perspective on life. I would call it was a life quake. It was a transformative moment for her, where when she learned of this trust and its magnitude and the inheritance, she became very upset. And to hear her talk about it was really fascinating because at that young age, she realized or decided or believed that she was going to have to work harder than everybody else, and that any success that she had would be because of her name and because of her money. And she would have none of that. She would have none of that. And so she was really committed to proving herself. And one of the things that really challenged her is when she talked to her father about this. He said, as she was around the time when she's getting ready to go to college, he said, don't worry about college. Your job is to get married and have babies, in quotes. And so that landed very badly, very badly. And so she got that college education. She paid for it herself out of her trust because she did not feel the support from her parent. She was the first woman in her family to get a college education. And then she decided she had to move away. She had to move away from her family. And so she did. And so for her, it gave her a chance to find herself. She started, her life had, enormous amount of accomplishments. She was a matriarch that was very committed to talking about values that she can support given her financial resources. She had a successful marriage and successful family. And what was very interesting was that her brother was tapped to be the family office head, and it didn't go well. And so her family came to her and said, could you run the family office? And so she does. And she did. And it was really a tremendous story. And of course, she's going to tell a different story to her kids. So hers was a great story.
Fantastic. Thank you. At the Drucker School, we pride ourselves on being what we call pracademic, which is a combination of practical and academic. And we like to make sure that the work that we do is both practical and academic. You share some very practical applications, especially with the task of preparing the rising generation. Will you share some of what you learned there?
Yeah. I really appreciated that the willingness of these matriarchs to talk about how they prepared their children. There were many lessons actually in the book. I just chose a couple that I like. I think would have been resonating at least with the Pitcairn clients. One lesson that they've shared that is harder than it sounds is to really encourage self-discovery and to be an advocate to the next generation and giving them the opportunity to create their own identity. That could be outside the family enterprise. It often can be outside the family enterprise. And that may be a little harder for their male family leaders. So in encouraging their self-discovery, there really were sort of two important incentives. One was, to really help them find their own individual life path, but then also connected is to figure out how to stay aligned or connected with the family, with the multi-generational family legacy, and maybe have a role in it. So they really encouraged self-discovery. It's something that we talk to our families a lot about. We've been doing more work with our rising generation in helping them with their own sort of leadership development. So that was one practical way. Another practical way, I actually found this quite heartening. The female leaders that we felt were successful here, a successful practice were those who were willing to refresh and then model their values. And when we asked them what was sort of the most important thing that they've worked on, thought through, with raising their families, they talk about sort of, being able to instill values in them. And yet these matriarchs talked about the fact that they've learned to be open to these values being interpreted in a different way from as their children. So you take the same value and they have different interpretations. That was oftentimes hard, but it was actually quite fruitful for them. And then kind of a third way that I think is sort of practical, and it's something that we talk a lot about here at Pitcairn, is to really teach stewardship. And many younger rising gen don't really quite know what that is. Certainly those who were in the wealth inheritor cohort, they had more experience in that. But there's often the need and the request by these matriarchs to move from having an owner mindset to having a stewardship mindset, and to really outline what that means to them and talk about that together. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about is what is stewardship to you, and how might you think about sharing that? Because a stewardship mindset is different than an owner mindset.
Very interesting. One of the things I've heard from families I've worked with is sometimes there is some resentment from the rising generation that they have to basically be the caretakers of someone else's dream or someone else's stuff. And I don't know, was there any learnings that you had in terms of these women talking about the rising generation and how they interacted with the wealth? Were they repelling some of the obligations that came with, or what did you learn there?
Yeah, I think, some of the matriarchs that we talked to there was an interesting disconnect because they would really want their children to become stewards of the wealth so that it could last generations into the future. And then on the other hand, the rising gen said, okay, that's fine, but I don't know what that means. And so there was a bit of a good intention, but it didn't quite make a connection. And I think that what has really resulted is very important here, and it's for those women who have set up governance structures, family governance structures, to ensure there's dialogue around these things. Because without the dialogue, things it's very difficult to achieve this alignment that we talked about earlier. And so I think it's fair on both sides, but what do you do about that? It's really difficult to it's very personal.
Yeah.
But ensuring that there are family council meetings, family meetings, in order to talk through some of these things.
Yeah. And I've seen, the importance of revisiting the purpose of the wealth. Like, why do we have it?
Yeah.
How do we use it? And not having it remain the wealth creator's dream forever. Whatever we can do to empower the rising generation or these new stewards, to allow them to have their values and their purposes start to influence those resources. I think that's something I've seen that allows for that better buy-in. And it's not leaving the purpose, the main purpose necessarily of the wealth creator, but if it's going to be incorporated in their life, they have to have something that they care about.
Right. It has to be shared, Dave. I think that's really what, some of the things, something that Dennis and his wife Cynthia do so beautifully is sort of give us a construct or a framework to talk about what is of value to me as an individual. And then how do we take this series of individuals and build something around the family, and thus it can be shared. And finding what can be shared is a practical step that we really encourage.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to some questions from our audience. The last one I have is, there's a number of advisors on the call today, and I want to serve that group too. So what insights can you share about how to approach and become valuable to this specific subset of people, these women within this family enterprise system? What guidance would you give?
Yeah, this is a question, of course, that we asked all the women, because I think that, as I said earlier, there is a role that we can play here in our industry as advisors to these kinds of families that can really knit together where there's shortcomings, and so we really worked hard to carefully understand the impact of what we do on these families of wealth. I think the one a key theme that came out from the women is that they really don't want somebody who is going to be their caretaker. That is not a theme that ever, or sort of a situation that ever plays well. And instead, what they're looking for is empowerment. And how can they be empowered to make better decisions? How can they learn the language in order to be to feel confident in their own decision making? And so that is very difficult when the advisor's been hired by their husband or their father, where we've always had, through the generations, we've always had so and so. And so I think my first tip for advisors would be to really shed the legacy mindset. It's dangerous. Just because you've always done it this way does not mean that it's really resonating with families. We have one woman was saying, her husband brought her in for all of the conversations on hiring the advisor. There was something like 10. They got it down to 3. She was present for all of it. He passed away, and she really was not engaged in all of those conversations. So she really found herself in a tough spot. There was a young advisor who was supporting her. And he really helped teach her the language and helped her make some of her decisions, which she liked. And so she fired the advisor that her husband worked so hard to hire, because she just really needed somebody who would let go of that legacy mindset. I think another thing for advisors to really put it in their head is this idea of sort of capitalizing on being a coach, on coaching. And those advisors who supported goal attainment and stronger understanding of wealth really were more effective and deemed more as a partner with, not a partner under which. And so I would suggest, capitalizing on coaching. I think, I'll give you two other tips, is really to lean into both spouses. One woman talked about how one advisor came over, sat at the table with the father and two sons, and it was a female advisor, and she would not get started until the matriarch came out of the kitchen, put the knife down, and sat there. And it was brilliant. It was really brilliant. This advisor is, wonderful human, but she really leaned in. And of course, that matriarch, they still have a relationship. I think just the last tip I would say is, and it's something that we're working really hard on here at Pitcairn, is to really look at wealth as not just the money.
Yeah.
It's not just the money. So there's obviously supporting the financial capital, but really working to support the family capital. And so really honoring those family dynamics in a constructive, productive ways is super important to play that role. That's hard for us as advisors. We've not been trained that way.
Yeah.
And so it's a trend that I think is quite important in our industry today.
Thank you. One of the things I'm encouraging advisors to do is just redefine the client relationship and verbalizing, like we don't serve wealth creators anymore. We serve family units. And so
Yeah.
we might not be a good fit if that other thing is really what you want. And that's scary for an advisor, to verbalize that. But ultimately, these advisors are going to be positioned to help families in such a different way, a deeper way, if they can courageously serve the family unit rather than just serving a wealth creator, whether it be the man or the woman in the family. All right, let's turn to a couple of questions. Steffi, you had a question in the chat. Why don't you go ahead and take yourself off mute? And if you want to just ask Amy that question, or that would be great.
Sure. Hi, Amy. Hi, Dennis. Nice to see you. My question was, so I asked, this is all very interesting. I'm always keen to learn then what can families do. So what are some key actions that families can take to create an atmosphere that builds the female members' confidence? Confidence is a big theme and allows for them to be able to upset that apple cart you mentioned, and then help the family get past the status quo.
Yeah. Let me answer that by sort of telling you the story of a woman who did a brilliant job with this. Her name is Doris. She was a G4. It was a family business that had a liquidity event. She had lots of brothers and uncles. And when she was in her early 30s, she was really curious about the family business and the wealth. And so she started asking questions. She started to lean into her own development, which is something I would certainly encourage, is when you say confidence, it's so true, Steffi, because it means so many different things. But she said, I just want to understand. And it was the response from her family was so cool. Cool. It was they were okay with that, so long as she could do everything else she's supposed to do. So taking care of the family and things of that sort, and sort of a role as a mother. But she didn't feel satisfied that she was learning a language. So she was 35 and she went and got a CFP. She has nothing to do with being a certified financial planner. She went and got a CFP. As the family began to change leadership in the generation, she was really pivotal in starting to press the family on creating a family governance system. They had sort of a once a year family meeting. They kind of blessed a lot of things. They assumed a lot of things. And she really took the baby steps. And they were baby steps. I mean, creating a whole family governance system can take years, right? And consultants and, she did get a coach, and they helped her and she had 3 brothers, really talk through, what should we be talking about? How can I have some help around, it became a quarterly family meeting. And so she started to she learned the language, and then she started to get to request some creativity around creating the early steps of family governance and having these kinds of conversations. And of course, now she became the head of it, of the family council. And while she was doing that, Steffi, she had her daughter right there. So Doris is now in her late 70s, her daughter's 42, and now she's running the family council. So it's very incremental. It's incremental, but between learning the language and talking through decision-making, she really made progress. She upset the apple cart, that is for sure. She did.
Thank you for your question, Steffi. Rick Simonetti, if you're available to take yourself off mute, we'd love to have you ask your question as well.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for doing this. Some great stuff. I was just thinking about, as you started this, with the fact that many of the women that you interviewed suggested other people that you should connect with. And I just wondered how many of them had supported each other directly, and did they create these relationships that kind of helped give them the confidence and support that they might need to make changes in their own family office or their own family legacy and what they were striving to accomplish. I just kind of wondered how critical that you might have found that in your discussions.
How critical, Rick, that
like connecting with each other, like if one woman suggested that you speak to another, had they already connected, had they supported each other through their journeys,
more peer-to-peer, right?
Yeah, peer-to-peer mentorship, whatever you may call it. Even if they were at different places, one had successfully taken over that, being the matriarch and just wondering.
Yeah, I didn't, that was not necessarily the case, in of the 40 women that we've talked to over 50 now. A couple of them knew of someone who had this, extraordinary experience with family wealth. But one of my favorite questions that I get asked, maybe this slightly answers this, Rick, is, sort of what I was most surprised about. And I found it really interesting that there were very little who had any kind of peer group or sort of conversed with each other, but their willingness to engage in this research study was because they really found that a lonely place.
That's what I was gonna say. It seems like such a lonely journey.
It's a lonely journey. Yeah. It's a lonely journey. And I think that, to me, that was one of the more poignant things, because we have, extraordinarily personal information that they were willing to share. Of the 48 were Pitcairn people, right? So most of them I didn't know. Most of them Dennis didn't know. but they were willing to tell us some very, very deep things. And I think that they want to do better for the next guy. I think
Yeah.
there were things that they didn't like about it. And why so much of what we wrote about was sort of lessons to share for others who might find themselves in a similar spot, which of course, to Dennis and I was incredibly inspiring, to be able to kind of help the next guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thanks for
I
sharing
have
that.
one thing, again, Amy, you know about this, but we have a project going on at the Drucker School called the Better Half Project, where we're interviewing spouses specifically with YPO, and we're trying to figure out, what are some of the nuanced dynamics of identity and how these spouses identify and how that identity changes and morphs over time, and also how they define purpose. And it's been fascinating. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead and submit those in the chat. I have one more here, and this one is I guess a statement and then a question. Comparison is the thief of joy. As that statement goes, no two circumstances are the same for these women in the roles they play. What advice do you have for women to not fall into the trap of comparison?
That is really good. One of the things that we didn't get to talk about, that I think this sort of younger generation, there's at least more support around, and that is to work to identifying your own sort of brand potential. And I think, I don't know about all of you on the line, but I never really thought about my brand as I was, sort of rising in my career and my own sort of development in that. And, when I compare there weren't a lot of women to compare. I started on Wall Street and I was kind of the token female, and it was a joke. It was a funny joke. I laughed at it at the time. It's not so funny now, but I think that, comparing myself and some of the women, when they compared themselves to those who came before them, who created the wealth, it was quite discouraging, quite honestly. And so those comparisons are really damaging. I think that what I so love about this study was that over and over and over again, women talked about supporting one's self in their self-discovery and self-realization. And I think that with that mindset, if you're committed to that, I think that it will put a dent in the negative impact around comparison. So I would really encourage self-discovery and self-realization. I'll give you one quick example on that, Dave. We have a young woman who's, I don't know, in the late 20s. Her family her grandfather built a multi-billion-dollar company, and we are doing coaching for her. And she honestly doesn't feel like she can be a leader in anything. And so we worked with her. We did some really simple work around sort of what are your strengths, and we outlined some of the strengths. We did some testing, and she was just flummoxed by what was revealed about her strengths, and she just didn't see that. And so we're helping her to own that. And I think that if we can work as advisors in support of that and helping people to sort of lean into their strengths, I think that the damage by comparison is certainly alleviated to a degree.
Yeah. One of the connected points I'll make there is it feels like there's more pressure to not have failures along the way when you're raised in a family of financial wealth. And I would say the rest of the world assumes that we're gonna have failures along the way, and there's so much pressure following those that have been very successful, that I wonder if we can make trying and striving and falling down and getting up, if we can somehow make that cool again,
Yeah.
generational, in families of generational wealth. I feel like that's part of the challenge, but I don't know if that's too much of a reach.
Yeah, but I was at Family Office Exchange for many years before coming to Pitcairn, and one of my favorite members there was a man who, really successful man, delightful person. And I was, like, sort of, what are some big highs for you? And he said, well, I'm going to start by telling you what was a big low that became a big high. And he began to share that he gave each of his kids a certain couple $1 million. They're 3. And they blew it all in their business ventures. And it was really hard. They came back sort of tail between the legs. And he talked about that as one of a high for him, because he gave them an opportunity to try and to fail. And they failed, but it was okay. And he talked quite proudly about that. And I just appreciated that because I think, to your point, Dave, it's good to hear stories like that. A number of these families can afford to fail. And, so many of us, I know I'm guilty of this, I'm there to catch my kids. But sometimes you have to kind of let that go.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Sure.
We have just 1 minute left. Steve, we didn't get to your question, but the question was about how many of these women consider themselves family champions? And I guess if you could just answer that quickly, and then
Yeah, really quickly, I will tell you, Steve, what is amazing to me is very few. Too few is my answer. Too few. And I'll close with a really neat story. One of the women who was a Pitcairn client, she shared recently with our CEO, well, Pitcairn does this for me. We do reporting, we do investments, we do our trust, we got, all this financial stuff. And she said, but Amy helped me tell my story, and started to cry. And tears came to her eyes. And I think that what was neat about that woman is that she never felt that she was a leader or a family champion. But in sort of helping her tell her story, she saw what an enormous family champion she was. So I thank you for that. That's a really, really neat question. Thanks, Steve.
Beautiful. Well, Amy, I want to thank you for joining us at
Sure.
Authors at Drucker. This has been so fun. Thank you, and Dennis, for doing this work. It's so important. We plan to extend it, celebrate it, popularize it as much as we can, because this is a group that has so much to give, so much they're already giving, and they need to be celebrated. And so that's our task.
Yes, to help them find their voice and to create their legacy. So,
Absolutely.
thanks for having me, Dave.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks
So
to all the listeners.
Yes. So next month, again, just to give a quick pitch, we'll be fortunate to have Chad Ford talking about his book, Dangerous Love, Transforming Fear, Conflict at Home, at Work, and in the World. And Chad is the director of BYU Hawaii's David O. McKay Center for International Cultural Understanding. He's fantastic. Thank you so much for investing your time today with us at Authors at Drucker. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at david.specht, SPECHT, @cgu.edu. And I hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks again.